Welcome. Welcome to this time of worship. One of the ways that we prepare for worship is to take the time to call ourselves to worship. It's a way of intentionally laying aside any distractions that might prevent us from being present to one another and to God. Sometimes we do this with words, calling words back and forth to one another, reminding ourselves of who we believe and who we hope that God is. And sometimes we use music, the melodies and the lyrics, calling us beyond our obsessions and toward God, specifically toward worship of God. And so, in this time of reflection and worship, we're going to engage our bodies as we call ourselves to worship. So, wherever you are in this moment, if you'll settle into your couch or your chair, your bed, or on the floor, you might want to close your eyes or soften your gaze, but just relax as you're able and simply breathe. And as you breathe, allow your breaths to deepen and slow. And imagine yourself inhaling with the Spirit of God. You may say the word God or Spirit aloud, or just imagine that in your mind as you breathe in, God. And then on the exhale, imagine exhaling love, breathing in God, breathing out love. Breathing in God, breathing out love. God, your breath blowing across chaos created the universe. Your breath moving in our bodies creates life. Your breath is spirit, transforming us, making us love. Still breathing in God and breathing out love. Allow yourself to release whatever worries you may have. Just let them rest for this time, for these few moments. Whatever is keeping you awake at night, whatever is calling you to sleep too much, whatever weighs heavy, just let it rest. And as you are ready, keep that breath deep and slow, and let's be together in a time of reflection on the early church. Those first disciples after Jesus' death and resurrection expressed their faith, lived out their faith by gathering in the temple frequently, by sharing meals together in one another's home, by praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And even as they lived out their faith, they struggled still to understand the true nature of Jesus that they followed. For the women and men, the disciples that lived with him, they knew Jesus as man, as teacher, as friend. For those who had never met Jesus, they learned about Jesus from the stories of others. The Gospel of John was written to clarify for all the identity of Jesus. Was Jesus human? Was Jesus divine? Was he both? Was he human part of the time, divine part of the time? Was Jesus both? all of the time? We remember in this time a conversation that Jesus had with his early followers, his first disciples, at what would be the last Passover that he celebrated with them. He shared news with them of his imminent suffering and his death, and understandably the disciples became confused and frightened. Jesus saw all of this and understood that they did not understand who he was and what he was called to do. And out of love for them, he began to comfort them, to share with them the truth of his identity. He began to reveal himself to them. He described for them rooms that were being prepared for them in God's house. And he said, if you believe in Abba, God, you believe in me. And one of the disciples there at the table, Thomas, asked a question. He said, okay, so how do we get to these rooms in Abba's house? And Jesus responded, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life. If you know me, you know Abba, God. Another of the disciples at table, Philip, then said, all right, Jesus, show us Abba, God. Show us Abba, God, and we'll be okay. Let us open our hearts to Jesus' response, written in the Gospel of John, chapter 14. Jesus speaks, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? Whoever has seen me has seen Abba. How can you say, show us Abba? Do you not believe that I am in Abba and Abba is in me? The words that I say to you, I don't speak on my own, but Abba who dwells within me does these words. Believe me that I am in Abba and Abba God is in me. But if you do not, then believe me because of the works themselves. Very truly, I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than these, because I'm going to Abba God. Whoever has seen me has seen Abba God. The disciples could know Jesus by looking at his parent, Abba. The disciples could hear the words of God by listening, by opening their ears to the words of Jesus. The disciples could witness God's vision of life for all by watching the life of Jesus. Because the heart of God was the heart of Jesus, there was a strong family resemblance, we could say. I knew that my name would be one of the first. With a name like Bailey, I usually showed up near the top end of any class roster. So on the first day of 10th grade, I settled into my desk in English Lit. I sat up straight and I plastered a very fake, confident look on my face and prepared to say, "Here," in my coolest voice. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was Mrs. Jones' pause both before she spoke my name and after I responded. She put down her roll book and she pulled down her glasses and looked around the room trying to locate the face that went with Bailey. And Mrs. Jones spotted me right away. "Melissa Bailey, you're Lindy Bailey's sister, aren't you?" Aware of the stares of my classmates, I nodded, "Yes, ma'am." "I had Lindy in several of my classes. He's a smart young man." I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Yes," she said, "Lindy and I had some pretty interesting times together. Did he ever tell you about the time that I sent him to the principal's office?" "No, ma'am." "I imagine that he probably wouldn't tell you. Well, I did have to send him to the principal's office. He's quite a prankster, Lindy is. Are you anything like him?" I looked at her, trying to get a read from her face as to what the right answer might be. And in the end, all I could do was shrug and say, I don't know. Well, that year, Mrs. Jones learned that Lindy and I share a lot more than similar facial features. We both loved to read, to write, to create stories, and we both really appreciated Mrs. Jones' sense of humor. Mrs. Jones also learned that year that Lindy and I were different people. Not all of the Baileys were brave enough or foolish enough to play practical jokes on their teachers. And that wasn't the first time, and it wasn't the last time that people immediately recognized me as Lindy's little sister or Sam's daughter or Gina's oldest girl. One time, my sister Amy and I greeted my parents at their front door, both at the same time, standing side by side. And for a split second, my parents were confused, their eyes looking from one to the other, not sure which of us was which of us. We look quite a bit alike, we Baileys. And when we're not looking alike, we can actually be found acting somewhat alike, because for all of our differences, we really do resemble one another. Now, of course, Jesus's resemblance to God is quite different from the resemblance that I share with my family. Amy and I just kind of look like each other. Lindy and I only sometimes act like each other. Cameron and I just sort of think alike about some things. Jesus isn't kind of, sort of, sometimes like God. Jesus is God. When we see Jesus, we see God. First century disciples found it hard, and I think that 21st century disciples also sometimes find it hard to believe that Jesus and God are quite literally one. Jesus understood this and said, okay, if you can't believe that I am one with God because of what you see me do. And what we see Jesus doing, what we saw Jesus do, what we read of Jesus doing, is showing us and showing all people what life could be like if we lived as Christian family, mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters in the household of faith, living and working as Jesus lived and worked. You know, I'm proud to be Lindy's sister. He's just as smart as Mrs. Jones said he was. And as embarrassed as I was on the first day of 10th grade, I was secretly pleased that this well-known prankster was my brother. And when my dad used to introduce me as his daughter, when my mother used to hold my hand in public or we'd sit in church together, I was proud to be their child. And when people see me with my sister Amy and make comments about how much we look alike, I feel good about that. When my little brother Cameron shows me around his city and I meet his friends and my coworkers, I walk straight and tall because I am proud to be his sister. I'm glad that when people look at me, they recognize me as a Bailey. And in this moment, the Gospel of John challenges me. When people look at me, they probably will know that I'm a Bailey, but do they know that I'm a Christian? Does my family resemblance begin and end with my biological family, or has it grown to include the one who creates me, the one who gives me life? Do the boundaries of my faith begin and end at my family home, or do they reach out to include others, to include even the universe? I want to resemble Jesus. I want to resemble the words and actions of Jesus. I want to celebrate the life and the hope that God, Jesus, Spirit, the One, enlivens in me. And if people can't believe that God and Jesus are one simply because I believe it, I want them to come to know God because of the way I live out that belief. I want the heart of Jesus to be my heart. So I invite you to imagine with me, just imagine for a moment that you're sitting in a room filled with people and you're waiting for your name to be called. It's the first day of whatever, something. And you're feeling a little nervous, hopeful maybe, but you're anticipating, and you listen as names are called, and then you hear your name and you throw up a hand in the air and you say, "Here." The caller of names pauses and puts down the roster, looks around until they see you. And then they say, you're a Christian, aren't you? You say, yes, I am. You know, Jesus was here a while back. We spent quite a bit of time together. Did Jesus tell you about our time together? Yes. Yes, he did. Jesus is quite a character. Are you anything like him? I hope so. I hope so. I invite you to consider the places and the people in your life. How might the heart of Jesus be calling your heart to be the presence of Christ in those places with those people? Who needs a bit more patience or a lot more love? Who is hungry for a sign of comfort or a word of hope? Where is there a need for a voice of calm or a voice for justice? Where is there a need for acts of mercy, acts of sacrifice? Wherever you are, whenever you are, may your heart be lifted with hope at the call of God. May you lean into all of the doorways of grace and service. And may you be recognizable. May you be recognizable as one who loves the way that God loves. Amen.